Alright, let's talk about one of the biggest scientific problems with the idea of a literal planet-wide flood, the heat problem. Flood geology says the entire surface of the Earth was reshaped in a single year. But here's the issue, the processes required to do that would generate so much heat that it would boil the oceans and melt the crust. And once your oceans are boiling, you don't have a survivable planet. Here's where all that heat comes from. Catastrophic plate tectonics. Some creationist models say the ocean floor was moving at meters per second, not inches per year. That level of rapid subduction creates enormous friction, deformation, magma movement, all of which dump heat into the oceans and the atmosphere enough to vaporize water. Then there's the vapor canopy idea. Older models said there were a giant shell of water vapor around the Earth that collapsed to create the flood, or in other words, the firmament. A canopy thick enough to hold that much water would create a runaway greenhouse effect long before the flood even started. And when it finally collapsed, even more heat released into the atmosphere. Then there's accelerated nuclear decay. Some models claim radioactive elements decayed much faster during the flood years to compress Earth's geological timeline into a few thousand years. But that kind of accelerated decay would release so much heat that it would literally melt entire rock formations. Then there's the rain itself. To flood the whole planet, you'd need a staggering amount of water condensing and falling. Condensation releases heat, a lot of it, enough to raise the atmospheric temperatures into the hundreds of degrees. Rain doesn't help you if it's basically steam. Then, of course, there's impact events. Some versions add asteroid impacts happening during the flood, which obviously adds even more heat. Creationist researchers know this is a problem. They actively acknowledge the heat issue, and their responses fall into basically two different categories. There's natural solutions, ideas like maybe the water absorbed it, or maybe some areas stayed cool, but thermodynamics doesn't really allow these escape hatches. And then of course there's the supernatural solutions. The most common response of course being that God miraculously moved the heat multiple times. And that's fine as a statement of faith, but it pushes the explanation outside anything science can test. And that's why mainstream science sees the heat problem as basically fatal to a literal global flood. Because if you follow the physics, a world-changing flood on that scale doesn't give you a planet humans or animals could survive on. It gives you an ocean of steam and a crust that's melting.